If you're just joining us, you're listening to DPR Half Hour on the network service of Radio Nigeria. Now, we have a guest in the studio today. I told you earlier that we have officials of the planning division of the DPR. We have the full team. So when you see the planning guys in the studio, you know they have to talk a lot about planning. And we have the Assistant Director, Budget and Strategic Planning of the Planning Division of the DPR, Mr. Steve Ayuba. I'm glad to have you in the program today.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we also have the Accountants Planning Division of the DPR, Mr. Badmus Muftau. Thanks for coming.
It's a pleasure.
We have a lady in the house, Onome Okogo. She's a senior economist and of the Planning Division of the DPR. We're glad to have you today in the program.
Thank you very much.
All right, so let's kickstart. Let's get into business now. The Assistant Director of Budget and Strategic Planning is here, and he will be doing a lot of explanations for us when it comes to the planning function of the department here in Nigeria. And let's look at the role of the planning division of the DPR. A lot of people say things like, well, what does the DPR do? What has the DPR got to do with planning? So tell us now, what's the major role of the planning division of the agency?
All right, the Department of Petroleum Resources, as you're very well aware by now, it's one of the leading agencies of government that is mandated to ensure that the oil and gas industry operates optimally and creates value for Nigeria as a country. As a regulator, you're going to find that our roles are generally geared towards ensuring that every aspiration that this nation has from the oil and gas industry, that those aspirations are fully realized. But then when you come to the Department of Petroleum Resources, you're going to find that the performance of DPR as an organization is heavily guided by how well we plan. There's a popular cliche that says, if you fail to plan, then absolutely you're planning to fail. And because DPR as a regulatory agency wants to ensure that government is always succeeding in all that it promises to Nigeria, the planning division then is responsible for ensuring that all the government takes that the oil and gas industry generates for this nation, that it is administered in a way where government earns maximum results in receiving everything that is due to Nigeria, whether it's royalty, gas flare penalties, signature bonuses, concession rentals. There's also a revenue stream that we call the miscellaneous oil revenue. Now, all of those revenues are administered by the planning division in a way to ensure that government receives maximum return from this sector. And one of the many other things that the planning division also does is to ensure that the entire hydrocarbon chain in Nigeria, which cuts across the upstream, the midstream, and the downstream, that as a nation, Nigeria, that we're able to optimize the value that we get from this value chain through ensuring that all our activities are done within cost benchmarks that will then create values for us that are very, very encouraging. Now, as a planning division, again, you will discover that we ensure that our organization as the Department of Petroleum Resources is run and managed in a way where our performance is very optimal. We are also responsible for preparing the enterprise budget of all the operations of the Department of Petroleum Resources. And because data, it's one of the lifelines of any successful business, more particularly when you come to oil and gas business, then you find that data practically drives a lot of the major decisions that are taken. The planning division in DPR is also responsible for coordinating all the enterprise data administrative roles, so that at any time any investor needs information on the oil and gas industry, you can always obtain reliable and accurate information
from the planning division.
From the planning division. So in the summary, these are some of the leading roles that the planning division of DPR undertakes for the organization.
All right, quite a comprehensive summary, if you ask me. It looks like a huge job. How big is the division?
So the planning division in DPR is structured in a manner where all the key competencies that we require are made available. Now the number of staff goes from anything 31 to about 35 or 40 staff. But then the very important thing to note is not really the number of staff. What you need is the right competencies and the right capabilities that will deliver on all the roles that we have. So if you look at if you look at the staff that the planning division has, you're going to find the economists, the petroleum petroleum engineers, there are chemical engineers, there are accountants. And why do you need a bouquet of all of these competencies? Because when you plan, when you run strategy roles, you need to then have people who clearly understand how our industry operates. So when you come to the planning division, you'll find all of those competencies.
Interesting. Well, we have one of the competencies in the house, and I'm always a senior economist. What are some of the things you do as a senior economist? I'm wondering why you need the services of a senior economist in a planning division of DPR.
Okay, as an economist in the planning division, you may be tasked with the responsibility of assessment for companies. So when we talk about assessment, we're looking at what the producing companies are supposed to remit to the government as government take.
Okay.
So when you look at an oil producing company who is into crude oil production, you want to know the volume of production that comes out of the fields. You want to know what they owe the government as royalties. And you want to ensure that what is owed to the government is actually paid as at when due. So the assessment of that process is done by an economist. That's just one of the few roles.
Okay, aside so many other roles.
Aside so many others.
Now, Mr. Ayuba, you did mention something when you were given that broad introduction. You said things about royalty, revenue stream. Can you explain the revenue streams that constitutes the government's take, which DPR administers on behalf of the Federation?
All right, thank you very much for that question. So if you look at the oil and gas industry, there's so many revenues that comes to government. In the business of oil and gas, a lot of the revenues that comes to government are classified as government take. And then when you then really look at the government take, you'll find that it's made up of so many revenue components. One of the main revenue components that we administer for government is the signature bonus. Now, anytime acreage award is it's undertaken, one of the revenues or one of the economic rents that comes to government is the signature bonus. Now, signature bonus.
Signature bonus.
So signature bonus is one of the economic rents that comes to government. It's a government take when acreages, that's oil blocks, are awarded to prospective investors in the oil and gas. Now, normally blocks are awarded for any period up to 20 years. Once those blocks have expired, and then those blocks have to be renewed for another given period of time. Normally you will find the owners of those blocks being expected to pay a renewal fee. That also comes as signature bonus. So that's just one of the components that is termed as a government take. Oil royalty are also economic rents that government takes from the exploration and production of oil and gas. So oil royalty is another component of the government take. Gas royalty is another resource that you can then generate from oil and gas activity. Government also takes royalty from that. There's a component of the government take that is known as the concession rentals. So once a block has been allocated or awarded to any prospective investor, it is expected that annually there are rents that will be paid to government, known as concession rentals. Now for gas flare payment, that's another component of a government take. Then miscellaneous oil revenues for all the licenses and the approvals that the Department of Petroleum Resources awards on behalf or issues on behalf of the government. There are statutory fees that are normally associated with the award of those licenses. And now there are so many of them. There are hundreds of licenses that the Department of Petroleum Resources issues every year. The statutory fees that are normally charged with respect to issuing those licenses are generally tagged as miscellaneous or revenue. Now, because we are effecting and ensuring that regulatory requirements are being met in situations where regulatory requirements are breached, then you'll find that the provisions of the laws of the Federal Republic of Nigeria requires in certain situations that penalties and fines are also paid by anyone that breaches what the prescribed regulatory requirements are. Okay. So when you take all of these components, they generally make part of what the government takes from oil and gas operations.
All right.